you ever feel like you are constantly comparing your life to others? This story will change your perspective. In a small town nestled between rolling hills and a winding river, there lived a man named Richard. In his late 40s, he was a hard-working shop owner and, by all accounts, a responsible man. However, despite his efforts, he felt as if life was slipping away from him. Each morning, he would wake before sunrise to open his shop and spend hours serving customers. Yet, during his moments of respite, his mind would drift to others. His old school friend, James, had become a wealthy businessman, traveling the world and living in luxury. His neighbor, Henry, had retired early, spending his days painting by the riverside. Even the younger men in town seemed to be progressing faster than he ever had. One evening, as Richard closed his shop, he let out a deep sigh. His heart felt heavy, burdened by years of silent frustration. Why does everyone else seem to be ahead in life while I'm stuck in the same place? He muttered to himself. The weight of his thoughts grew unbearable. So he decided to visit an old monk named Father William, who lived on the outskirts of town. The monk was known for his wisdom, and people often sought his guidance when they felt lost. When Richard arrived at the monastery, Father William was sitting on the stone steps, watching the evening sky. The old monk smiled warmly as Richard approached. "Ah, Richard," Father William said, "I can see that something is troubling you. Come, sit with me." Richard hesitated for a moment, but then sat down beside him. "Father, I feel like my life is standing still while others are moving forward. I see my friends succeeding, traveling, and enjoying life, while I do the same thing every day. I work hard, but it never seems to be enough. I can't help but feel like I have failed in some way." Father William listened patiently, nodding occasionally. After a moment of silence, he spoke. "Richard, let me show you something." He led Richard to a small garden behind the monastery. In it, different types of plants grew, some tall and strong, others small and delicate. Father William pointed to two plants growing side by side. "Do you see this bamboo tree?" he asked. Richard nodded. "And do you see this fern next to it?" Again, Richard nodded. "When I planted the fern, it sprouted quickly, with its leaves unfolding within weeks. But the bamboo, for years, seemed to do nothing. I watered it and cared for it, but no growth appeared above the soil. It wasn't until 5 years later that the bamboo suddenly shot up, growing taller than any other plant in the garden." Richard looked at the monk, unsure of his point. Father William continued. "During those years, when the bamboo seemed to be doing nothing, it was actually growing its roots deep, strong, unseen roots. When the time was right, it grew taller than I ever expected. Richard, your life is like that bamboo. Just because you do not see immediate progress does not mean growth isn't happening." Richard felt a lump in his throat. He had spent so much time comparing himself to others that he had forgotten to value his own journey. Father William smiled knowingly and added, "A river does not worry about the speed of another river. The sun does not compare itself to the moon. Everything follows its own path and rhythm, and so should you." That night, Richard walked home feeling lighter than he had in years. The monk's words echoed in his heart. For the first time in a long while, he stopped thinking about what others were doing and focused solely on his own life. He viewed his shop not just as a place of work, but as a space where he had built relationships, where people relied on him, and where he was needed. He thought of his family, his wife and children, who loved him not for his wealth or status, but for who he was. He realized he was not failing. He was simply growing in his own way. As time passed, Richard stopped measuring his success against the achievements of others. He focused on his life, his work, and his journey. He worked on improving his shop, not because he felt behind, but because he genuinely enjoyed it. He spent more time with his family, cherishing the moments instead of worrying about the future. One day, years later, as Richard stood outside his shop watching the sunset, a younger man approached him. "Mr. Richard," the young man said, "I admire you. You always seem so at peace and so content. How do you do it?" Richard smiled. "I once spent too much time looking at the lives of others, believing I was falling behind. But then I learned a simple truth: just focus on your life. We all grow at our own pace. When you stop comparing yourself to others, you start truly living." The young man nodded thoughtfully, and Richard knew that just as Father William had once guided him, he was now passing on that wisdom. "So, what about you? Are you constantly measuring your life against others? Maybe it's time to stop. Perhaps it's time to focus on your own life. Because in the end, the only race that truly matters is the one you run at your own pace." Struggling to focus on yourself is quite common, especially in a culture that often prioritizes productivity and caring for others over personal well-being. Many people feel guilty about taking time for themselves, or are unsure where to begin with self-care. It's important to remember that this struggle is a common experience and not a reflection of personal failure. Start by setting small, achievable goals for self-care and gradually build up your routine for self-focus. Focusing on yourself is essential because it enables you to recognize and address your mental, emotional, and physical needs. This, in turn, can lead to improved self-esteem, better mental health, stronger relationships, and a greater ability to manage stress by setting boundaries and prioritizing your well-being. Ultimately, taking care of yourself allows you to live a more fulfilling life by understanding and nurturing your own needs first. By concentrating on your needs and achievements, you naturally foster a stronger sense of self-worth. This doesn't imply that you become arrogant. Rather, you cultivate a healthy respect for yourself, allowing you to acknowledge your strengths, celebrate your successes, and recognize your value. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.